I welcome you back to my IGCSE lecture series, and today we will begin with an entirely new chapter. And this new chapter, this is entitled as Nutrition in Plants. As far as the word nutrition is to be bothered, so you see that for the human beings, anything that we eat in our diet, so that would be the nutrition. And by the nutrition, what we mean is that either the living organisms they have to make their own food or they have to eat the food. As far as the nutrition in the plant is concerned, so the scenario is that they are not the consumers, but rather than they are the producers or they are the autotrophs. So that is why their aspects of the nutrition they would entirely be different from us. Why they are autotrophs or why they are producers, the reason is that they have an ability to carry out this process of the photosynthesis, and when they would do this photosynthesis, so by that they would be able to make their own food. And by the food, you know is that whenever the photosynthesis would be happening, so the glucose would be formed, but making only the glucose is not the way around because as I have said for the nutrition, there has to be the making, there has to be the proteins present, there has to be the fats present, and the glucose that is made by the photosynthesis. So this is the sugar. So we will see in a while that how come the plants that we have got with us that they only make the glucose by the photosynthesis, and later how do they convert it into the other biological molecule which would be required to be maintaining the metabolism or that would be responsible for the survival of these plants. So the situation is very simple, you see that the plants they are the producers. Why? Because they absorb the light energy. They take up the water and then they use the inorganic carbon dioxide that we have in the environment, and then they are carrying out this process of photosynthesis, and at the end they would make the glucose out of it. The reason is that this glucose has got the bonds in it, and those bonds it has a form of energy stored in them, and that would be the chemical energy, and that chemical energy the plants they then utilize it to be releasing the energy in the form of ATP by the mitochondria. So if I were to take you quick to how do the word equation of the photosynthesis looks like, so I would require the carbon dioxide, I would combine it with the water, then we would cause the chlorophyll that are available within the chloroplast of the plants to be absorbing the light energy, and by that they would make the glucose, and then they would make the oxygen gas out of it. At the same time, we need to have a grip on the chemical equation that we have got for the photosynthesis. Whenever the photosynthesis has to happen, so six molecule of the CO2, they should combine with the six molecules of the water. And here we are making a biological molecule out of it, and this is a simple sugar, a monosaccharide, and the name of the monosaccharide, you know, as I have mentioned in the word equation. So this is the chemical formula or the molecular formula for the glucose molecule that we are making here. And at the same time, we will be releasing the oxygen gas out of the plants. Now, the situation here is that the plants they have made the glucose, and we would see that how this glucose would be utilized in the plants, and how come the plants they would be able to convert this glucose to other biological molecules, and by the other biological molecules, what we mean is that how come they would make the protein from this glucose, how would they make the fats from this glucose molecule, because this is a basic biological molecule and it requires some interconversion. So before I do teach you that, here is another situation that from where do these raw materials for the photosynthesis come from? Now you see as that this carbon dioxide for the process of the photosynthesis, this actually the plants they take them from their external environment. And in the second class we will see that the plants they have on their bottom in their lower epidermis some specialized cells and they are the guard cells. These guard cells, they open up the stomatas, they become turgid, and the stomatas would open up, and ultimately the CO2 from the external environment this would diffuse into the leaf. And in the leaf, we have got multiple cells and the tissues that would be carrying the photosynthesis. Along with that, the water that we have got, it would be absorbed from the root hairs, and then it would come into the root. From there, it would go into the stem, and from the stem, it would reach the leaves with the help of the vessels that are required for the transportation of the water and ions, and these are the xylem of the leaves, we say. And now you see that here we have made the glucose, and at the end we have made the oxygen, and this oxygen again would diffuse out through the spaces that we have in the leaves into the external environment. Now here we have got the interconversion of the biological molecule, that how come the plants they would be able to be fulfilling their nutrition aspects. So since the plants they have made the glucose, and this glucose has to be used for the respiration process initially. And by the respiration, what we mean is that the plants, after they have made the glucose in their chloroplast, so they would send it into the mitochondria. Because this is a little misconception of the students. They believe that if the plants they make their own food, then they would not require the mitochondria. But this is not the right thing. Plants they are not our relatives. They are making their own food in the chloroplast with an intention to be carrying to their mitochondria. So over there they can aerobically respire it and then can release energy out of it in the form of ATP. Now, if we were to see that further, how come this glucose would be converted? So you see in the glucose, the elements that we have got is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and the plants initially they would be using them in the aerobic respiration. The same glucose, the plant have got some enzymes in them, and those enzymes they would convert this glucose into another simple sugar, and that is fructose. So the glucose and the fructose they would combine, and when they would combine, so they would make a double sugar out of it, and that is the sucrose with us. And this sucrose would then be loaded into the phloem vessels. And these phloem vessels, they are responsible to move or to translocate the sucrose from one part of the plant to another part of the plant. Because you see that these are the leaves that are photosynthesizing. The roots are absorbing the water and the ions, and they are not photosynthesizing. So the roots would be in the need of the sugars. So what the leaves they are doing is that they convert the glucose into the sucrose by attaching them with the fructose, and now it would be loaded into the phloem vessels, and then it would be carried toward that part of the plant that are not photosynthesizing, and that includes the roots as well. Now the second situation is that we also have to make the proteins for the plants. Okay, and when the protein has to be made for the plants, so the situation is that we are in the need of this nitrogen element. Why do we need the nitrogen element? Because for the glucose, we only have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And whenever we make the proteins, so we not only need carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but we also need the nitrogen element. So what happens in the plants is that the xylem vessels, along with the water, they would be bringing the nitrate ions to the leaves as well. These nitrate ions that we have got, so they would combine with this glucose molecule, and as a result of that, we will make amino acids out of it. And these amino acids further they would keep on combining, or they would be condensed with one another, and the plants they would make the polypeptide chains out of it. And these polypeptide chains they would further be converted into the protein. The other thing is that the same nitrogen element we require to be making another complex, you could say, or a functional kind of the biological molecule, and that is a nucleic acids. And for that, again, we require this nitrogen. Now, the other situation is that, okay, fine, the plants, they got this glucose converted into the proteins. Now, we say that how come they would be able to convert this glucose into the fats, lipids, or oils? So the plants, they have some enzymes in them. And these enzymes, they work on the glucose molecules, and as a result of that, we make the fat, lipids, and oils out of it. Not all the glucose which the plants they have made by the process of photosynthesis would be utilized in their aerobic respiration, but the excess glucose molecules or the particles that we have, the plants they would polymerize them, they would condense them with one another, and as a result of that, this glucose can be converted into starch as well, and it could be converted into the cellulose as well. So if I were to quickly summarize it, the glucose which the plants made by the photosynthesis, it would be used in the aerobic respiration, it would be converted into the sucrose and then transported to those part of the plant that do not photosynthesize with the help of the phloem vessels. Excess glucose is stored in the form of the starch as well, and this is also utilized to make the cellulose of the cell wall. We combine the same glucose with the nitrogen element, and we make amino acid and then the polypeptide chain, then the proteins out of it. And also, we make the nucleic acids as well by the use of this nitrogen element. The plants, by the use of some enzymes, they convert the glucose into the fats, and we don't require any other element because the element profile of the glucose and the fats is same, because the fat, lipid, and oil they have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in them, and the glucose have got the same elements in them. So this is the basics of this plant nutrition chapter. And in the next class, we will see that how come the plant's leaves they are adapted to be carrying out the maximum of the photosynthesis.